Hi, Miss Hildreth.
I'm supposed to be in this meeting, but
Sharonda, are we recording right now? Did you set that up?
I think it just comes up automatically once you log in. I guess that's how she has it set up.
Oh, okay.
My computer is giving me problems now.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, I see Sharonda.
So,
Marquia is here also. Aisha, Karen, and Mrs. Hildress. Wonderful. All right. Um, it is 6:01, I think. I don't know who's going to show up because I know the invitation went out late. It just went out this morning, so we're glad to have all of you who are here right now. So we're going to just go ahead and get started, okay? Because we don't want to have you out, up, doing this too late. So I'll just introduce myself. I am Dr. Thomas. I am the coordinator of the special education program and an associate professor here at Virginia State University. I will be making this presentation along with two of my, students who are now my colleagues because they're presenting with me. So if we can have Marquia and Sharonda introduce yourselves and then we'll get started.
good evening. I am Marquia Foyet. I am a student of Dr. Thomas, and I'm excited to go ahead and present to you all tonight. Let's see, get my camera on. There you go. Yep. Hi, good evening.
Sharonda, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, here I go. I'm Sharonda Pan, and I'm here to be a presenter. And I'm a student of VSU.
Hold on. All right, sorry. I do have some internet problems, and when I keep my camera on, sometimes there's drag or delay. So if I need to turn it off, you know why. I just turned it off because it's glitchy, okay?
I'm having the same issue.
All right, so I mean, if you want to, just to make it smoother, let's just, we can keep our cameras off. I think it would be okay. Everyone okay with that? Keeping the cameras off?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you. All right, so tonight we're going to be talking about understanding adverse childhood experiences, building self-healing communities. This is a training that myself, Marquia and Sharonda went to last week where we became ACE interface master trainers. So as part of our responsibility, to that certification, we have to give 2 presentations. And so I thought, what better crowd to give it to than our own students here at Virginia State. And so we have also our Culturally Responsive Academy as part of the I2Teach grant. So perfect timing, perfect fit. And we're also going to have another one with Dr. Jefferson on November 13th at 6 p.m. And she's going to talk about culturally responsive classroom management. So please attend that one as well. Okay, so we're going to get started. Okay. All right. I guess I should go back. All right, so basically, we're going to talk about ACEs, and in every major public health discovery, the first actions that save lives are to accurately share the facts and take informed action with our own spheres of influence, which is actually you, our beloved Virginia State students. Okay, today we'll provide a brief overview of the presentation, Understanding Adverse Childhood Experiences. The presentation includes in-depth information about the neurobiological effects of adversity on development, the impacts of childhood adversity and trauma on population health and resilience, what we can all do to improve health and well-being across the lifespan. Okay, this slide says the memory of our experiences is stored in our body, and many people don't understand that when we have any kind of traumatic experience, it does get stored in our body, not just in our minds, but also in our body. Okay, the scientific debate over whether the issues are nature versus nurture is over. we know that it's both. We now know that the memory of childhood and experience is stored in our bodies and not just our minds. From that very spark of life, as the cells divide and form a tiny human being, experience has profound impact on who we are and who we will become. In the past couple of decades, there's been an explosion of new understanding, beginning with the Adverse Childhood Experience, or ACE study, which we're going to talk about later, about how and why adversity and trauma can reliably predict risks for mental, physical, behavioral health, and productivity in the population. This is great news. What's predictable is preventable. Because of recent discoveries in neuroscience, epigenetics, epidemiology, and resilience studies, we can understand how protection, prevention, and resilience promotion can profoundly impact health, safety, and productivity, and reduce public and private costs now and for generations to come. So basically, now that we're getting some legislation around ACEs, insurance companies and governments in the government, et cetera, are thinking money. We can reduce costs if we counteract the ACEs early on in life. We see over the lifespan that there's an improvement of health issues that skyrocketed, that could skyrocket it if ACEs are not addressed early on. Okay, so understanding ACEs is about discovery. It's a story of scientists who challenged themselves to think differently about the facts they could see. This is a story of their impatience with the amount of heart disease, diabetes, depression, and suffering that exists in our country. It's a story about the courage to set aside beliefs that can hide the truth, and about systematically testing new possibilities. And finally, this is a story about you and me, and what we might do with a scientific discovery powerful enough to profoundly change the future of the public's health. But by extension, because we're educators or going to be educators, we can also change the face of education, because we know anyone working in the classroom today that we have children with behavioral concerns due to adverse childhood experiences. And if we can address these issues, not by ourselves. I mean, we are a community, we are a village. So it's going to take mental health professionals, it's going to take educators, it's going to take medical professionals, et cetera, us working together to change the outcome, for these kids who could eventually become adults who have these major health issues later on in life. Okay, next we're going to talk about the human nervous system. We all know, I think we know, that the nervous system orchestrates body functions and perceptions. Okay, and neuroscience helps us understand ACEs, and they're so powerful. Before I introduce the ACE study, I want to explain a little bit about brain development. The human central nervous system connects us to ourselves, to other people, and to the world around us. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord that integrate all of our senses and information from receptors located throughout the human body. It regulates internal body functions and manages elaborate chemical and electrical signaling. The nervous system considers sensory input in the context of each and every second almost instantaneously, and determines our understanding of and response to the world we live in. Cells in the nervous system are called neurons. They are stunningly effective at processing and transmitting information, and they have a central purpose in doing so, to adapt in ways that keep us alive. When, for example, people grow up with sustained danger, the stress hormones and neurotransmitters that are released as a part of the child's fight, flight, or freeze reaction have impacts on brain functioning and mass. The brain prepares for living in a dangerous world. Characteristics like being quick to anger, slow to soothe, hypervigilant, and hyperreactive actually help the species survive in dangerous times. But these same characteristics can also lead to cardiovascular disease, mental health challenges, and productivity problems. Sorry, forgot to change my slide. Okay, so Dr. Teicher, who is a researcher from, actually a leading researcher from Harvard University, he says, it's when our biology collides with social expectations that we run into trouble. If you put a person from a very safe and sheltered childhood into the chaotic and turbulent environment of, say, riot control, that person may struggle unless he has learned some very specific skills. Okay, this is why we see sometimes a lot of turnover in schools amongst our teachers. If they didn't come from a troubled background, they don't have the skills to deal with children who did come from a troubled background. Can someone mute themselves, please? Thank you. Okay, so likewise, a child adapted to a dangerous, stressful world may not sustain patience. He or she may not share, cooperate, or use words as a first choice. In other words, these are the kids they're going to throw hands when they get upset. They're going to curse you out. They're going to throw hands. They're going to throw something. That's a kid that has been in a stressful home or childhood environment. Okay, when that child comes to school and we ask her to sit still, share, and cooperate, there can be a painful disconnect that is hard for everyone. The child will have to be actively taught the skills required to succeed in this context, just as we would train a person from the benevolent path how to act in a chaotic and dangerous environment. Okay, and I know I keep saying before we talk about the ACEs Act, but really, this little video I want to show, it runs about 16 minutes. This woman here, Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris, she was one of the first pediatricians on the scene outside of the two neuroscientists that did the study. It was actually a longitudinal study, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm going to let my colleague Markia talk about that after this video. Okay, so this is a brief TED talk that she gave, because when she found out about ACEs, she basically incorporated it into her practice and was able to enact legislation in the state of California to ensure that ACEs were addressed in the pediatric population there. Okay, so I'm just going to share this with us briefly.
Dr. Thomas,
Yes.
I don't know about anybody else, but I can't see anything on your screen.
Oh, I wish you had said something. You couldn't see the slides?
No, I just see right now it shows your picture, but other than that, I didn't see
Yeah,
anything.
I can see everything. I can see the slides.
Oh, okay, thank you. So you can, some of you can see the slides, but some of you can't. Okay, I'm sorry. So I don't know who can see the slides and who
I
can't.
can see it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try to get this video to come back. If not, I'll just, oh, okay. Okay, 1 second. Okay, here we go. Okay, this is Dr. Burke-Harris. Everyone can see the YouTube video?
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you hear it?
In the mid-90s, the CDC and Kaiser Permanente discovered an exposure that dramatically increased the risk for 7 out of 10 of the leading causes of death in the United States. In high doses, it affects brain development, the immune system, hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. Folks who are exposed in very high doses have triple the lifetime risk of heart disease and lung cancer, and a 20-year difference in life expectancy. And yet doctors today are not trained in routine screening or treatment. Now, the exposure I'm talking about is not a pesticide or a packaging chemical. It's childhood trauma. Okay, what kind of trauma am I talking about here? I'm not talking about failing a test or losing a basketball game. I am talking about threats that are so severe or pervasive that they literally get under our skin and change our physiology. Things like abuse or neglect, or growing up with a parent who struggles with mental illness or substance dependence. Now, for a long time, I viewed these things in the way I was trained to view them, either as a social problem, refer to social services, or as a mental health problem, refer to mental health services. And then something happened to make me rethink my entire approach. When I finished my residency, I wanted to go someplace where I felt really needed, someplace where I could make a difference. So I came to work for California Pacific Medical Center, one of the best private hospitals in Northern California. And together, we opened a clinic in Bayview, Hunters Point, one of the poorest, most underserved neighborhoods in San Francisco. Now, prior to that point, there had been only one pediatrician in all of Bayview to serve more than 10,000 children. So we hung a shingle and we were able to provide top quality care regardless of ability to pay. It was so cool. We targeted the typical health disparities: access to care, immunization rates, asthma hospitalization rates, and we hit all of our numbers. We felt very proud of ourselves. But then I started noticing a disturbing trend. A lot of kids were being referred to me for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But when I actually did a thorough history and physical, what I found was that for most of my patients, I couldn't make a diagnosis of ADHD. Most of the kids I was seeing had experienced such severe trauma that it felt like something else was going on. Somehow, I was missing something important. Now, before I did my residency, I did a master's degree in public health. And one of the things that they teach you in public health school is that if you're a doctor and you see 100 kids that all drink from the same well, and 98 of them develop diarrhea, you can go ahead and write that prescription for dose after dose after dose of antibiotics, or you can walk over and say, what the hell is in this well? So I began reading everything that I could get my hands on about how exposure to adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. And then one day, my colleague walked into my office and he said, "Dr. Burke, have you seen this?" In his hand was a copy of a research study called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. That day changed my clinical practice and ultimately my career. The Adverse Childhood Experiences Study is something that everybody needs to know about. It was done by Dr. Vince Felitti at Kaiser and Dr. Bob Onda at the CDC, and together they asked 17,500 adults about their history of exposure to what they called adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Those include physical, emotional, or sexual abuse, physical or emotional neglect, parental mental illness, substance dependence, incarceration, parental separation or divorce, or domestic violence. For every yes, you would get a point on your ACE score. And then what they did was they correlated these ACE scores against health outcomes. What they found was striking. Two things. Number one, ACEs are incredibly common. 67% of the population had at least one ACE, and 12.6%, 1 in 8, had 4 or more ACEs. The second thing that they found was that there was a dose-response relationship between ACEs and health outcomes. The higher your ACE score, the worse your health outcomes. For a person with an ACE score of 4 or more, their relative risk of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease was 2.5 times that of someone with an ACE score of 0. For hepatitis, it was also 2.5 times. For depression, it was 4.5 times. For suicidality, it was 12 times. A person with an ACE score of 7 or more had triple the lifetime risk of lung cancer and 3.5 times the risk of ischemic heart disease, the #1 killer in the United States of America. Well, of course, this makes sense. You know, some people looked at this data and they said, come on, you have a rough childhood, you're more likely to drink and smoke and do all these things that are going to ruin your health. This isn't science. This is just bad behavior. It turns out this is exactly where the science comes in. We now understand, better than we ever have before, how exposure to early adversity affects the developing brains and bodies of children. It affects areas like the nucleus accumbens, the pleasure and reward center of the brain that is implicated in substance dependence. It inhibits the prefrontal cortex, which is necessary for impulse control and executive function, a critical area for learning. And on MRI scans, we see measurable differences in the amygdala, the brain's fear response center. So there are real neurologic reasons why folks exposed to high doses of adversity are more likely to engage in high-risk behavior. And that's important to know. But it turns out that even if you don't engage in any high-risk behavior, you're still more likely to develop heart disease or cancer. The reason for this has to do with the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, the brain's and body's stress response system that governs our fight or flight response. How does it work? Well, imagine you're walking in the forest and you see a bear. Immediately, your hypothalamus sends a signal to your pituitary, which sends a signal to your adrenal gland that says, release stress hormones, adrenaline, cortisol. And so your heart starts to pound, your pupils dilate, your airways open up, and you are ready to either fight that bear or run from the bear. And that is wonderful if you're in a forest and there's a bear. But the problem is what happens when the bear comes home every night. And this system is activated over and over and over again. And it goes from being adaptive or life-saving to maladaptive or health-damaging. Children are especially sensitive to this repeated stress activation because their brains and bodies are just developing. High doses of adversity not only affect brain structure and function, they affect the developing immune system, developing hormonal systems, and even the way our DNA is read and transcribed. So for me, this information threw my old training out the window, because when we understand the mechanism of a disease, when we know not only which pathways are disrupted, but how, then as doctors, it is our job to use this science for prevention and treatment. That's what we do. So in San Francisco, we created the Center for Youth Wellness to prevent, screen, and heal the impacts of ACEs and toxic stress. We started simply with routine screening of every one of our kids at their regular physical, because I know that if my patient has an ACE score of 4, she's 2.5 times as likely to develop hepatitis or COPD. She's 4.5 times as likely to become depressed, and she's 12 times as likely to attempt to take her own life as my patient with 0 ACEs. I know that when she's in my exam room. For our patients who do screen positive, we have a multidisciplinary treatment team that works to reduce the dose of adversity and treat symptoms using best practices, including home visits, care coordination, mental health care, nutrition, holistic interventions, and yes, medication when necessary. But we also educate parents about the impact of ACEs and toxic stress the same way you would for covering electrical outlets or lead poisoning. And we tailor the care of our asthmatics and our diabetics in a way that recognizes that they may need more aggressive treatment given the changes to their hormonal and immune systems. So the other thing that happens when you understand this science is that you'll want to shout it from the rooftops, because this isn't just an issue for kids in Bayview. I figured the minute that everybody else heard about this, it would be routine screening, multidisciplinary treatment teams, and it would be a race to the most effective clinical treatment protocols. Yeah, that did not happen. And that was a huge learning for me. What I had thought of as simply best clinical practice, I now understand to be a movement. In the words of Dr. Robert Block, the former president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, adverse childhood experiences are the single greatest unaddressed public health threat facing our nation today. And for a lot of people, that's a terrifying prospect. The scope and scale of the problem seems so large that it feels overwhelming to think about how we might approach it. But for me, that's actually where the hope lies. Because when we have the right framework, when we recognize this to be a public health crisis, then we can begin to use the right toolkit to come up with solutions. From tobacco to lead poisoning to HIV/AIDS, the United States actually has quite a strong track record with addressing public health problems. But replicating those successes with ACEs and toxic stress is going to take determination and commitment. And when I look at what our nation's response has been so far, I wonder, why haven't we taken this more seriously? You know, at first, I thought that we marginalized the issue because it doesn't apply to us, right? That's an issue for those kids in those neighborhoods, which is weird because the data doesn't bear that out. The original ACEs study was done in a population that was 70% Caucasian, 70% college educated. But then, the more I talk to folks, I'm beginning to think that maybe I had it completely backwards. If I were to ask how many people in this room grew up with a family member who suffered from mental illness, I bet a few hands would go up. And then if I were to ask how many folks had a parent who maybe drank too much, or who really believed that if you spare the rod, you spoil the child, I bet a few more hands would go up. Even in this room, this is an issue that touches many of us. And I'm beginning to believe that we marginalize the issue because it does apply to us. Maybe it's easier to see in other zip codes because we don't want to look at it. We'd rather be sick. Fortunately, scientific advances and, frankly, economic realities make that option less viable every day. The science is clear. Early adversity dramatically affects health across the lifetime. Today, we are beginning to understand how to interrupt the progression from early adversity to disease and early death. And 30 years from now, the child who has a high ACE score and whose behavioral symptoms go unrecognized, whose asthma management is not connected, and who goes on to develop high blood pressure and early heart disease or cancer will be just as anomalous as a 6-month mortality from HIV/AIDS. People will look at that situation and say, what the heck happened there? This is treatable. This is beatable. The single most important thing that we need today is the courage to look this problem in the face and say, this is real, and this is all of us. I believe that we are the movement. Thank you.
Okay, that was Dr. Nadine Burke-Harris. She has really brought ACEs to the forefront in terms of bringing it to the medical profession, and a lot of great work is done. What really struck me about this study, especially about her TED Talk, is when she talked about her inability, children being brought to her where people were saying that they had ADHD, and she could not make that diagnosis. So what she found was that these are children who had suffered adverse childhood experiences. So for those of you who are in your classrooms, who you have those children, who might have a 504 and they say this child has ADHD, it may not be the case. It could be that they're hypervigilant because they have experienced or are currently experiencing adverse childhood experiences. So once you know this, you can, when you know better, you you do better, that sort of thing. So basically, I think that this is a very powerful piece of information for us to have as educators in public schools or anyone who's working with children. Okay, so next I'm going to let Ms. Markia Hoyette continue the next part of the presentation.
I believe I'm next.
Okay, go ahead, Sharonda.
Okay. We have been talking about the effects of toxic stress on individuals. Now we're going to switch gears and talk about the effect of toxic stress on the population as a whole. The field of epidemiology is where we'll turn. Epidemiologists are scientists who study the origins of disease, disability, productivity, and health in population. They help us to focus our efforts on issues and processes that will make the most difference for the well-being of everyone. We're talking about a large study about the enduring effects of adverse childhood experience. Dr. Rob Edna and Dr. Vincent Folletti are the co-principal investigators of the study, which we call the ACE study. Most prior studies of the health and social effects of childhood abuse focus on a single type of adversity, such as sexual abuse. The ACE study broadened the picture to include multiple types of childhood stressors. In addition, the ACE study measured a wide array of health and social problems. The ACE study is unique because it provides the potential to understand how multiple forms of childhood stressors can affect many important public health problems. Design of the ACE study began in the early 1990s as a partnership between the Centers of Disease Control and Prevention in Atlanta, Georgia, and the Kaiser Permanente Department of Preventive Medicine in San Diego, California. More than 17,000 adult members of the Kaiser Health Insurance Plan completed a survey about adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, health behaviors, disease risk, mental health, substance abuse, and other health and social problems. Their ages range from 19 to 94 years. Study participants were generally well educated, most had attended college, and only 6% did not have a high school diploma, as compared with 13% of the US population. They were predominantly white middle-class people who had access to some of the best healthcare in the world. Study participants are still being followed to assess the relationship of ACEs to the cause of death, incidence of disease, healthcare utilization, and the use of prescription medication. Next slide. Okay, this slide shows the 10 categories of adverse childhood experiences that were studied. The first group are indicators of household dysfunction, which include growing up with substance abusing household members, alcohol or drugs, parental separation or divorce, growing up with mentally ill household members or caregivers, witnessing intimate partner violence, specifically having a battered mother, or a criminal behavior as evidenced by having a household member in prison. 3 forms of childhood abuse were studied: emotional, physical, and sexual. The 2 forms of neglect were included, emotional and physical. As you can see from the percentages on this slide, ACEs are common in this middle-class, well-educated population. The ACE study found that ACEs are highly interrelated, which there is one ACEs, there are likely others. So it didn't make sense to study one category of adversity at a time. It made more sense to study the accumulation of adverse childhood experiences categories. So the scientists made a simple score. Each category of ACE adds to the total ACE score, from experiencing 0 ACEs categories to experiencing all 10 ACE categories. So ACE scores in the study range from 0 to 10. Next slide. So people who report higher ACE scores are more likely to have health and social problems. In fact, as the ACE scores goes up, the percentage of people with health and social problems also goes up. We call this dose-response relationship. You know, dose response, the more gas you put in your car, the more miles you can drive. In this case, where there is a higher dose of adverse childhood experiences, the higher the percentage of people with health problems. This chart provides an example, the relationship between ACE score and health problems. Liver disease. Along the bottom horizontal axis of the chart are ACE scores, from 0 on the left to 4 or more on the right. The vertical axis is the percentage of the population with liver disease. As you can see, the percentage of people with an ACE score of 0 who had liver disease was just over 5%. You can see that the percentage of people with liver disease goes up in a stepwise fashion from just 5% to 11% as the score goes from 0 to 4 or more. People with an ACE score of 4 or more are more than twice as likely to have liver disease than people with the ACE score of 0. This makes sense because the risk factors for liver disease include shooting up drugs with needles and syringes contaminated with hepatitis virus, or having intercourse with the person infected with the virus, or consuming large quantities of alcohol, and all these risks of liver disease are also increased as ACE score increases. Okay, Markia.
As you can see, ACEs are common and they're highly interrelated and powerful. Okay, ACEs have a strong cumulative impact on the risk of common health and social problems that is captured by ACE score. The ACE score is a good proxy measure of the dose of toxic stress experienced during childhood. People with higher ACE score are more likely to have multiple health and social problems, some of which increase the odds of their children having high ACE scores as well. The discoveries about the effects of toxic stress on the developing brains provide biologic plausibility of ACE study findings. Scientists have established a strong case for concluding the relationship between ACE scores, health problems is a cause and effect relationship. Preventing their intergenerational transmission is the greatest opportunity for improving the well-being of human population. In fact, the ACEs study team and ACEs interference believe that the greatest opportunity of our time, perhaps of all time. This slide shows the percentage of various health and social problems from the epidemiologists' estimates are caused by ACEs. The calculation that is commonly used to do this in public health studies is called population attributable risk. This is displayed as a percentage as an oil spill on the slide. The percentage of a problem coded by the oil spill represents the percentage of each problem that is potentially preventable by preventing ACEs. The percentage are quite large. In fact, the high percentage on this chart are rarely seen in public health studies. The cumulative effects of ACE reflects a powerful opportunity for prevention, no matter if you're working to prevent heart disease, cancer, and homelessness, or hopelessness, or improve business profitability. As we align a portion of our work around a common goal of preventing the accumulation of ACEs and moderating their effects, we will reduce all these problems and many others all at once. So you can see this marijuana use, anxiety, tobacco, asthma. It's a lot. When people hear about ACE studies, you can go ahead to the next slide. When people hear about the ACE studies finding, they often ask about resilience. People get excited about the notion of resilience, in part because it reminds us that our supportive actions matter. Our desires for resilience leads naturally to search for ways to help families and communities. These protective systems impact and guide positive adaptation. These powerful systems are individual capabilities attached and belonging with caring, competent people, protective community, faith, and cultural processes. We do know about individuals who do well despite adversity. We know that 3 protective systems are nested. People do best when they are living in thriving families and communities. We can help one another to develop personal attributes that help us all weather life storms. Personal attributes like positive views of one's life, self-efficacy, self-regulation are all discussed in length in the resilience literature. In the full-length version of this presentation, we go into detail about each of these systems, including what helps to build them, examples of implementation of resilient science, and how you can contribute to self-healing communities. These predictable patterns to transformative changes. It begins with discovery and communication, which leads people to clarify their values and thinking. With new knowledge and new habits of thinking, people change actions they take in every day of life. The collective actions of many people shape a new reality that can become ratified in organizations and policy change. The truth is that people create a new reality long before new laws are passed. Change is up to us. It is shaped by our thoughts, our conversation, the way we relate with one another in relationships, families, and in communities.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Markia and Sharonda. Does anyone have any questions about what you heard and saw today? Comments? Is this new information? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ranisha Speller. I was going to say that I really learned a lot about ACEs. I think I can understand the disparity of teachers because, like you said, if they don't have the knowledge or the experience in that nature, then it does become hard for them to like relate to their students. So I found this information very insightful this evening. Thank you for this presentation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Anisha. And I see something in the chat. Okay, thank you, Aisha. I'm glad it was helpful. Okay, are there any questions or comments? Because we don't want to, keep you any longer than we have to. I believe you're going to be getting a brief evaluation, a link for an evaluation that's going to come around from Dr. Bazemore. If you wouldn't mind completing that, that would be great. Thank you, Helen. You're welcome. All right. So with that, we'll say good night. Best of luck. Okay, this information, have you been peeking in my room? Miss Hildreth, it's in all of our rooms. It's in everybody's room. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. You all have a nice night.
Bye.
She logged off too?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, good night.
All right. Good night.